The wait is finally over. Opening day is here, and for the first time in several years, the Boston Red Sox enter a season with expectations that go far beyond simply being competitive. After reaching the playoffs in 2025 and spending the past few seasons building one of baseball's most highly regarded young cores, the Red Sox now find themselves in a very different position. This is no longer a team being discussed as a future contender. Instead, many analysts believe Boston has already arrived. Spring is finally here, New England. I'm Lauren, and this is the Granite Slate Sports Podcast. Predictions for the 2026 season have been overwhelmingly positive. Some projections have the Red Sox comfortably in the playoff picture. Others go even further, picking Boston to win the American League East outright. That's a significant shift from where this organization stood just a few years ago. The optimism isn't coming from one specific area either. Analysts have pointed to Boston's young talent, improved pitching staff, lineup depth, and overall roster construction as reasons why the club could be positioned for a successful season. In many ways, the Red Sox are entering 2026 with one of the most balanced rosters they've had in recent years. Of course, expectations can be a dangerous thing. Every season begins with optimism, and plenty of talented teams fail to live up to the hype. There are still legitimate questions surrounding this roster, and the American League East remains one of the toughest divisions in baseball. But as the season begins, the conversation surrounding the Red Sox has undeniably changed. The goal is no longer to watch prospects develop and hope for a brighter future. The expectation is to compete. And that raises the biggest question facing Boston entering 2026. Are the Red Sox truly ready to take the next step from promising young team to legitimate division contender? To answer that, we need to start with the biggest reason for all this optimism: the young core that has reshaped the future of the franchise. The optimism isn't coming from one specific area either. Analysts have pointed to Boston's young talent, improved pitching staff, lineup depth, and overall roster construction as reasons why the club could be positioned for a successful season. In many ways, the Red Sox are entering 2026 with one of the most balanced rosters they've had in recent years. Of course, expectations can be a dangerous thing. Every season begins with optimism, and plenty of talented teams fail to live up to the hype. There are still legitimate questions surrounding this roster, and the American League East remains one of the toughest divisions in baseball. But as the season begins, the conversation surrounding the Red Sox has undeniably changed. The goal is no longer to watch prospects develop and hope for a brighter future. The expectation is to compete. And that raises the biggest question facing Boston entering 2026. Are the Red Sox truly ready to take the next step from promising young team to legitimate division contender? To answer that, we need to start with the biggest reason for all this optimism: the young core that has reshaped the future of the franchise. For the past several seasons, nearly every conversation about the Red Sox has centered around the future. Fans were told to be patient while the organization rebuilt its farm system and developed a new generation of talent capable of returning Boston to contention. Now that future is no longer theoretical. Much of the optimism surrounding the 2026 Red Sox begins with a young core that analysts believe could define the organization for years to come. Players like Roman Anthony, Marcelo Mayer, and Christian Campbell have become central figures in nearly every projection and season preview surrounding the club. Instead of entering the year dependent entirely on expensive veteran additions, Boston enters 2026 with the expectation that many of its most important contributors could come from within the organization itself. That represents a major shift from previous seasons when the roster often felt caught somewhere between rebuilding and competing. Several analysts have specifically pointed to the continued development of the Red Sox's young players as the single biggest factor that could determine how successful this season becomes. If that group performs the way many expect, Boston suddenly looks capable of competing not just for a playoff spot, but potentially for the division itself. What's also important is the depth this system has created. Multiple season previews highlighted the organization's ability to withstand injuries or underperformance better than in recent years because of the number of young contributors now pushing for roster spots and playing time. Of course, there is still pressure that comes with expectations. Young players are rarely perfectly consistent over a full major league season, and several previews acknowledge that Boston's success could depend heavily on how quickly these players adjust to larger roles. Still, the overall message surrounding this roster has remained remarkably consistent. For years, Red Sox fans waited for the organization's next wave of talent to arrive. Heading into 2026, the belief around baseball is that wave may finally be here. And if the young core lives up to expectations, Boston could have the foundation necessary to compete with anybody in the American League. But while the young talent has generated most of the excitement, it's not the only reason analysts are so high on this team entering the season. The excitement surrounding Boston isn't based solely on potential. One of the most notable things about the 2026 Red Sox is how many analysts genuinely believe this team is ready to win right now. Across multiple season previews and projections, the Red Sox have consistently been described as a playoff contender, with some predictions going even further and placing Boston at the top of the American League East. That's a major change in perception for a team that spent recent years trying to climb back into contention. Part of that confidence comes from the overall balance of the roster. Rather than relying on just a few stars, analysts have repeatedly pointed to Boston's combination of young talent, established contributors, pitching depth, and lineup versatility as reasons the team appears more complete than it has in previous seasons. Several projections also emphasized organizational depth as one of Boston's biggest advantages entering the year. Over the course of a 162-game season, injuries and slumps are inevitable. The belief is that the Red Sox are now better equipped to handle those challenges because they have more legitimate options throughout the roster. Another important factor is expectations within the division itself. While the New York Yankees are still widely viewed as Boston's biggest competition in the AL East, multiple previews frame the race as far more competitive than it may have seemed in recent years. In some projections, the Red Sox were even picked to finish ahead of New York and win the division outright. That kind of prediction would have felt unrealistic not long ago. Now it's becoming part of the broader conversation surrounding this team. What's especially interesting is that many of the concerns surrounding previous Red Sox teams haven't appeared as prominently in these previews. Instead of questioning whether Boston has enough talent to compete, the discussion has shifted toward whether the team can stay healthy, get consistent bullpen production, and meet the expectations now being placed on such a young roster. In other words, the conversation has changed from rebuilding to contending. And one of the biggest reasons for that shift is an area that has often caused problems for Boston in recent years: pitching. For several years, pitching often felt like the biggest obstacle standing between the Red Sox and serious contention. Whether it was rotation inconsistency, lack of depth, or bullpen struggles, Boston repeatedly entered seasons with major questions on the mound. Heading into 2026, the outlook appears very different. Multiple season previews identified pitching as one of the Red Sox's biggest strengths entering the year, a dramatic shift from the uncertainty that surrounded previous clubs. Much of that optimism begins with Garrett Crochet, who is expected to play a major role at the top of Boston's rotation. But analysts haven't just focused on one pitcher. Several projections highlighted the overall depth of the staff as one of the primary reasons the Red Sox are being viewed as legitimate contenders. Compared to recent seasons, Boston appears to have more reliable options throughout both the rotation and bullpen, giving the club a better chance to survive the inevitable ups and downs of a long season. That depth matters, especially in a division as competitive as the American League East. Over 162 games, pitching injuries and inconsistency are unavoidable. Teams that contend deep into the season are usually the ones capable of absorbing those setbacks without completely falling apart. The belief surrounding the 2026 Red Sox is that they may finally have enough depth to do exactly that. There are still questions, of course. Some previews specifically identified bullpen reliability as one of the team's biggest concerns entering the season. Late inning consistency remains something Boston will need to prove over time, particularly in close games against top competition. Still, the overall tone surrounding the pitching staff has been overwhelmingly positive. Instead of entering the year hoping the rotation can simply hold together, the Red Sox are entering 2026 with analysts openly describing pitching as a potential advantage. And when that improved pitching staff is combined with the lineup depth Boston has built, it's easy to understand why expectations around this team have become so high entering opening day. As optimistic as the outlook may be, no team enters a season without concerns, and the Red Sox are no exception. The biggest question identified across multiple previews involves the bullpen. While Boston has added depth and talent throughout the pitching staff, several analysts still pointed to late-inning reliability as an area the team will need to prove over the course of the season. bullpen performance can completely change the trajectory of a year. Even strong teams can struggle if they consistently fail to protect leads late in games, especially in a division expected to feature tight competition between Boston and New York. Health is another major factor. Several previews emphasize that the Red Sox have built a roster capable of competing at a high level, but much of that optimism depends on key contributors remaining available throughout the season. Over a 162-game schedule, injuries are inevitable. The question is whether Boston can avoid losing too many important players for extended periods of time. There is also the challenge that comes with relying heavily on young talent. Players like Roman Anthony, Marcelo Mayer, and Christian Campbell have generated enormous excitement entering 2026, but expectations for young players can sometimes rise faster than development itself. Several season projections acknowledge that while Boston's young core gives the organization tremendous upside, there could still be growing pains as those players settle into larger major league roles. That doesn't mean analysts are pessimistic about the Red Sox. In fact, the opposite is true. What's notable about the concerns surrounding Boston is that most of them are tied to consistency rather than overall talent. The conversation isn't about whether the Red Sox are capable of competing. Most projections clearly believe they are. Instead, the biggest questions entering the season are whether the bullpen can consistently deliver, whether the roster can stay healthy, and whether the young core can meet the enormous expectations now surrounding the organization. If the answer to those questions is yes, the ceiling for this team becomes extremely high, and that leads directly to the biggest challenge standing between the Red Sox and an AL East title, the New York Yankees. No matter how much optimism surrounds the Red Sox entering 2026, the path to an American League East title still runs through the New York Yankees. Multiple season previews framed the division race as a battle between Boston and New York, with both teams expected to spend the season near the top of the standings. While some analysts projected the Yankees to remain the team to beat, others predicted the Red Sox would finish ahead of them and win the division outright. That alone says a lot about how dramatically perceptions surrounding Boston have changed. Not long ago, the Red Sox were being discussed primarily as a rebuilding club trying to close the gap between themselves and the top teams in the division. Entering 2026, the conversation is completely different. Analysts are now debating whether Boston is actually better positioned than New York over the course of a full season. Part of that confidence comes from Boston's overall roster balance. Several previews highlighted the Red Sox's lineup depth, organizational depth, and improved pitching outlook as advantages that could help them survive the grind of a long season. In contrast, some analysts suggested Boston may simply have fewer obvious weaknesses entering opening day. Still, competing with the Yankees over 162 games is never easy. The American League East remains one of baseball's toughest divisions, and every stretch of the schedule is likely to matter in what could become a tightly contested race. Head-to-head matchups between Boston and New York may ultimately play a major role in deciding the division standings later in the year. And for the Red Sox, that's exactly where expectations now sit. The goal entering at 2026 isn't just improvement, it isn't simply returning to relevance. The expectation is to compete directly with the Yankees for control of the division and prove that Boston's rebuild has officially turned into a true contention window. Whether the Red Sox can actually take that final step remains to be seen. But after years spent building toward the future, Boston enters this season believing the future may finally have arrived. As opening day arrives, the expectations surrounding the Boston Red Sox are higher than they have been in several years. The organization enters 2026, coming off a playoff appearance in 2025 and carrying the momentum of a young core that many analysts believe is ready to become the foundation of a winning team. Across multiple season previews, the overall message has remained remarkably consistent. The Red Sox have the talent to compete for a postseason spot and potentially challenge for the American League East title. That optimism is being driven by several factors. Boston's young players have generated significant excitement throughout baseball. The pitching staff is viewed more positively than it has been in recent seasons. The lineup appears deeper, and the organization as a whole is seen as better equipped to handle the challenges that come with a full major league season. At the same time, important questions still need to be answered. The bullpen must prove it can consistently protect leads. Health will play a major role in determining how high this team's ceiling can become. And perhaps most importantly, the Red Sox's young core now faces the pressure that comes with real expectations at the major league level. But that's also what makes this season feel different. For the past few years, Boston's future was something fans discussed in theory. The organization was building toward something larger, hoping its next wave of talent could eventually return the franchise to contention. Now many believe that moment has arrived. The Red Sox are no longer being judged simply on progress or long-term potential. Entering 2026, the expectation is to compete, contend, and remain part of the playoff conversation throughout the season. And if the young core develops the way many expect, Boston may not just be returning to relevance, the Red Sox could be returning to the top of the American League East. That will do it for this week's Granite Slate Sports podcast. Be sure to check back next week to get the latest on basketball, hockey, and more.